The Curse of the Hope Diamond. I had always prided myself on being a skeptic, a man of reason, someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. So when I inherited the Hope Diamond from my eccentric uncle, I laughed off the tales of its infamous curse. It was just a stone, an extraordinarily beautiful one, yes, but nothing more. How could a mere object bring misfortune, death, and despair? The diamond arrived in a velvet-lined box, glimmering dark blue under the soft light of my study. It was hypnotic, almost alive, as if it pulsed with some unseen energy. I couldn't resist wearing it just for a moment. The cold weight of the gem against my chest sent a shiver down my spine, but I ignored it, brushing off the sensation as nothing more than excitement. The next few days passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. But I began noticing strange things happening around me. It started small, a sudden chill in a warm room, the lights flickering, shadows moving just beyond my line of sight. At first I chalked it up to old wiring, to drafts in the house, but the incidents grew more disturbing. One night I was alone in the study, examining the diamond again. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making you feel like you're not really alone. I was tracing the facets of the stone when the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the freezing air. The door to the study creaked open on its own, a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but saw nothing, no one. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the creeping dread. It's just my imagination, I told myself, but the words felt hollow. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper, like someone breathing my name right into my ear. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was a voice, low and guttural, repeating my name over and over. I dropped the diamond, the sound of it hitting the floor ringing out like a gunshot in the stillness. The voice stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind an oppressive silence. My heart was racing, and I forced myself to bend down and pick up the diamond, my hands trembling. As soon as I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my chest, as if icy fingers had wrapped around my heart and squeezed. I gasped, nearly doubling over, but the pain vanished as quickly as it had come. I stood there, breathing heavily, clutching the diamond. Was it possible? Could the stories be true? No, I told myself, shaking my head. It was just a coincidence, a moment of panic brought on by the strange atmosphere. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, the news came. My best friend had died in a freak accident, electrocuted while fixing a light in his home. The shock of it left me numb. We had spoken just hours before, and he had been fine. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. And then I remembered the diamond, the whispered voice, the pain in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the diamond was somehow connected to the tragedy. I had to know more. I began researching the history of the Hope Diamond, and the more I learned, the more horrified I became. Every owner of the diamond had suffered misfortune, bankruptcy, madness, violent deaths. The stories spanned centuries, each tale more chilling than the last. And now it seemed the curse had come for me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside set my nerves on edge. The diamond sat on my bedside table, a constant reminder of the horror that was slowly closing in. I stared at it, unable to look away until exhaustion finally pulled me under. But my sleep was far from peaceful. I dreamed of darkness, an endless void where the only light came from the diamond, floating before me like a malevolent eye. As I reached out to touch it, the void swallowed me whole, and I felt cold hands dragging me down into the abyss. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, the diamond glowing faintly in the dim light. That's when I knew I had to get rid of it. But how? The stories were clear. Those who tried to sell the diamond or destroy it met even worse fates. I was trapped, caught in the grip of something ancient and evil, and there was no escape. Or was there? I recalled something I had read, a legend buried in the mountain of horror stories, a way to break the curse. But it required something I wasn't sure I was willing to give. Yet what choice did I have? The diamond was destroying my life, and it wouldn't stop until it had consumed me completely. I would have to confront the curse, face whatever force haunted this accursed gem, and hope that I could survive what was to come. As I made my decision, the house groaned ominously, as if it were alive and listening. And for the first time, I felt something other than fear, an icy determination. I would end this, one way or another. The following day, I could barely function. My mind was consumed with thoughts of the diamond, its curse, and the potential way out I had read about. I knew I had to act quickly before the curse claimed another victim, before it claimed me. The legend I had found was vague, more rumor than fact, but it was all I had. It spoke of a ritual, one that could supposedly sever the ties between the diamond and its curse. The ritual required 3 things: the blood of the current owner, an object of personal significance from a past victim, and the diamond itself, all brought to a place of great tragedy. I had no idea where to begin, but the first step was clear. I needed to find an object from a past victim. My uncle had been the most recent owner before me, but when I tried to recall anything of his that I might have, my mind drew a blank. His belongings had been scattered, sold off, or given away after his death. There was nothing left, except perhaps for the house he had lived in, a decrepit mansion on the outskirts of town. I drove there, the unease in my gut growing with every mile. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and forbidding, its windows like hollow eyes staring back at me. The locals avoided this place, speaking in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that had plagued it ever since my uncle had taken possession of the diamond. I hadn't been here in years, and now, standing before it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. As I stepped inside, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay. The house had been abandoned after my uncle's death, and time had not been kind to it. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the walls were draped in cobwebs. But I wasn't here to sightsee. I needed something, anything, that had belonged to my uncle, something that held a part of him. I searched room after room, finding little more than dust and debris. The house seemed to groan with each step I took, as if resenting my presence. But then, in a small, forgotten room at the back of the house, I found it. There, on a crumbling wooden desk, lay a photograph in a cracked frame. It was of my uncle, younger, smiling, holding a small object in his hand, the Hope Diamond. I could see the pride in his eyes, the joy of ownership, and it made my stomach turn. How little he knew of the horror that awaited him. I reached for the photograph, but as my fingers brushed the frame, the temperature in the room plummeted. I froze, a sense of dread washing over me. The air grew dense, almost suffocating, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, swallowing the weak light that filtered through the dirty windows. Then I heard it, a low guttural growl, like the sound of an animal lurking just out of sight. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. There was nothing there, I told myself. It was just the house settling, or maybe a trick of the wind. But the growl came again, louder this time, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned slowly, expecting to see something, anything, but the room was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched, of something malevolent lurking just beyond my sight, was overwhelming. I grabbed the photograph and fled the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house seemed to groan in protest as I rushed down the hallway, the walls closing in on me. Just as I reached the front door, I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest, like icy claws digging into my heart. I gasped, stumbling against the doorframe, but I forced myself to push through, breaking out into the cold, gray daylight. I stood outside, gasping for breath, clutching the photograph to my chest. The pain subsided, but the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I knew then that whatever presence haunted the diamond had followed me to this place, and it was not pleased with my discovery. There was no time to waste. I had the photograph, an object of personal significance. Now I needed a place of great tragedy, a location steeped in sorrow and death. As I drove away from the mansion, one place came to mind, a place that had always been shrouded in darkness and fear, the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cemetery was ancient, filled with crumbling tombstones and forgotten graves. It was a place where the dead were said to linger, their spirits restless, bound to the earth by unresolved pain. It was perfect. That night, I returned to the cemetery, under the cover of darkness, the diamond in one hand, the photograph in the other. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and a thick fog clung to the ground, swirling around the tombstones like grasping hands. I found an old, neglected grave near the center of the cemetery, its headstone worn and unreadable, and began the ritual. I placed the diamond on the grave, the photograph beside it, and then took a deep breath, drawing the knife from my pocket. The final part of the ritual required my blood, willingly given to break the curse. My hands trembled as I held the blade over my palm, but I couldn't hesitate. This was the only way. I sliced my palm open, the pain sharp and immediate, and let the blood drip onto the diamond. The moment the first drop of blood touched the stone, a violent gust of wind whipped through the cemetery, howling through the trees like a chorus of anguished souls. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and the fog thickened, becoming almost impenetrable. And then, from within the fog, I saw them. Shapes, figures moving toward me, their outlines barely visible but unmistakably human. They moved slowly, deliberately, their forms flickering in and out of the mist like phantoms. My heart raced as they drew closer, and I could see them more clearly, pale faces, hollow eyes, their expressions twisted in agony and rage. These were the victims of the curse, drawn to the place where their suffering began. I could feel their hatred, their pain radiating from them like a physical force. They wanted vengeance, justice for the torment they had endured, and they believed I was responsible. I stumbled back, the knife slipping from my grasp as the fog closed in around me, the phantoms reaching out with skeletal hands. My breath caught in my throat as the first of them touched me, a cold, burning sensation spreading through my body like wildfire. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the wind, lost in the cacophony of wailing voices. The phantoms were all around me now, their hands grasping, tearing, pulling me down into the earth. I tried to fight, to break free, but it was no use. The curse had claimed them, and now it was claiming me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The wind died, the fog lifted, and the phantoms vanished, leaving me alone in the cemetery, gasping for breath, my body trembling with shock. I looked down at the diamond, now dark and lifeless, the blood on its surface dried and cracked. The photograph lay beside it, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The curse had not been broken. It had only just begun. The ritual had failed, and now the curse was stronger than ever, feeding off my fear, my desperation. And somewhere, deep in the darkness of the cemetery, I could still feel them. The phantoms watching, waiting for the moment when they would return. I left the cemetery that night with a heavy heart, knowing I was no closer to escaping the curse than when I had started. My attempt to break the curse had failed, and the dark presence that clung to the diamond seemed to have only grown stronger, more malevolent. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the icy hands of the phantoms reaching for me, hear their anguished whispers just beyond the edge of consciousness. The next morning, I awoke to find my house in disarray. The front door was wide open, letting in a cold, damp breeze that carried with it the scent of earth and decay. The furniture in the living room had been overturned, books scattered across the floor, their pages torn and crumpled. It was as if something or someone had ransacked the place in the night. But what truly terrified me was the message that had been scrawled on the wall in dark, dripping letters. "You can't escape us. Asterisk." The words sent a chill down my spine. It was clear now that the curse was no longer content to merely haunt me. It was coming for me, and it wouldn't stop until I was dead, or worse. Desperation took hold. I needed answers, a way to stop this before it consumed me completely. I remembered the name of an old woman who lived on the outskirts of town, a reclusive figure known for her knowledge of the occult and the supernatural. People whispered that she had dealt with curses before, that she had the power to banish evil spirits. I had always dismissed such talk as nonsense, but now I had no other choice. The drive to her house felt like a journey into another world. The sky was overcast, the clouds dark and foreboding, and the trees along the road seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The woman's house was hidden deep in the woods, a small crooked cottage surrounded by overgrown weeds and ancient twisted trees. As I approached the door, it creaked open before I could knock, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of herbs and old wood. The woman stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and knowing, as if she had been expecting me. "You've brought something dark with you," she said, her voice low and raspy. "Something cursed." I nodded, unable to speak. She gestured for me to enter, and I followed her into a small, cluttered room filled with strange objects: candles, jars of herbs, ancient books, and what looked like animal bones hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with incense, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls. "Show me the diamond," she commanded. I pulled the hope diamond from my pocket, its dark blue surface glinting in the dim light. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took it from me, holding it up to examine it more closely. "This stone is old, older than you can imagine," she murmured, tracing the facets with her fingers. "And the curse that binds it is ancient, powerful. It feeds on the fear and suffering of its victims. Is there any way to break it?" I asked, my voice trembling with desperation. The woman sighed, placing the diamond on the table between us. "There is only one way to break such a curse," she said, "but it is dangerous, and it may cost you your life." I leaned forward, willing to do whatever it took. "What do I have to do?" She met my gaze, her expression grave. "You must return the diamond to the place where it was first cursed. Only there can the curse be undone. But be warned, the journey will not be easy, and the spirits that haunt this stone will not let you go without a fight." "Where do I need to go?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The diamond was stolen centuries ago from the temple of a vengeful goddess in India," she explained. "You must return it there, to the exact place where it was taken. Only then can the curse be lifted." India. The thought of traveling halfway across the world with this cursed object in tow filled me with dread, but I knew it was my only hope. The The woman gave me a list of instructions, rituals I would need to perform along the way to protect myself from the spirits that would undoubtedly try to stop me. As I left her cottage, the woman placed a hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Remember," she warned, "the closer you get to the source of the curse, the more dangerous it will become. The spirits will grow stronger, more desperate. You must not let your guard down, not for a moment." I nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. I had come this far, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The journey to India was fraught with terror from the start. The flight was turbulent, the plane shaking violently as if the very air around us was cursed. I clutched the diamond tightly, reciting the protective chants the woman had taught me under my breath. I could feel the malevolent presence of the spirits all around me, pressing in on me, trying to break through the fragile barrier of my willpower. But the worst was yet to come. As I arrived in India, the ancient land seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its air thick with history, mystery, and sorrow. The temple I sought was located in a remote, forgotten corner of the country, deep in the jungle where few dared to venture. It was a place shrouded in legend, a place where the goddess's wrath had once been invoked. I hired a guide to take me as far as he could into the jungle, but even he refused to go near the temple, his face pale with fear as he warned me to turn back. "That place is cursed," he said, his voice trembling. "No one who goes there returns." But I pressed on, determined to end this nightmare once and for all. The trek through the jungle was exhausting, the air thick with humidity and the sounds of unseen creatures. The farther I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very earth was trying to swallow me whole. And then as I reached the temple at last, I understood why. The temple was a ruin, its walls crumbling, overgrown with vines and moss. But the air around it was thick with malevolence, a palpable force that made it hard to breathe. The entrance was a gaping maw, dark and foreboding, and as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. I knew I was not alone. The interior of the temple was a labyrinth of shadow and decay, the walls adorned with ancient carvings of the goddess, her eyes watching me from every angle. The deeper I went, the more I could feel the spirits closing in around me, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. I could sense their desperation, their fury as they realized what I was about to do. Finally, I reached the inner sanctum, the heart of the temple, where the curse had been born. The room was empty, save for a small stone pedestal in the center, upon which I knew I had to place the diamond. My hands trembled as I took the stone from my pocket, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. As I stepped forward, a blast of icy wind knocked me off my feet, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The spirits were all around me now, their forms flickering in the darkness, their eyes glowing with malice. They lunged at me, their hands clawing at my flesh, tearing at my soul. I screamed in pain, in terror, but I forced myself to crawl toward the pedestal, the diamond clutched in my hand. The closer I got, the more violent the spirits became, their fury like a storm raging around me. I could feel their claws digging into me, their voices filling my mind with despair, urging me to give up, to let the curse consume me. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. With a final desperate effort, I reached the pedestal and slammed the diamond down onto its surface. The moment the stone touched the pedestal, a blinding light erupted from it, filling the room with a searing brilliance. The spirits screamed in agony, their forms disintegrating in the light, their voices fading into nothingness. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the air grew still, and the temperature returned to normal. The spirits were gone, banished by the power of the ritual. The curse had been broken. Or so I thought. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I noticed something strange. The diamond, now resting peacefully on the pedestal, seemed to pulse with a faint light, a light that grew stronger with each passing moment. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the temple. Before I could react, the stone pedestal cracked open, revealing a dark, swirling vortex beneath it. The vortex began to pull at me, its force growing stronger, dragging me toward it. I tried to resist, but it was no use. The vortex was too powerful. As I was pulled closer, I realized with a dawning horror what was happening. The curse had not been broken, it had only been unleashed. The spirits, freed from their torment, had now turned their wrath upon the world, and I had been the one to set them free. With a final, desperate scream, I was swallowed by the vortex, the darkness closing in around me. Darkness engulfed me as I was pulled into the vortex. It felt as though I was being torn apart, my body and mind disintegrating into the black void. The sound of the spirits' screams echoed all around me, a cacophony of rage and torment that seemed to stretch on for eternity. I lost all sense of time, of self. Everything was swallowed by the darkness. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the vortex spit me out, and I found myself lying on cold, hard ground. I gasped for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The air was heavy, oppressive, and filled with the stench of decay. As I struggled to my feet, my surroundings slowly came into focus. I was back in the temple, but something was different. The walls were no longer crumbling and covered in vines. Instead, they were smooth and unblemished, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. The carvings of the goddess were gone, replaced by strange symbols that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The temple was alive, throbbing with an ancient dark power that set my nerves on edge. And then I saw it, the Hope Diamond, hovering in the center of the room, suspended above the stone pedestal. It glowed with an unnatural light, casting twisted shadows across the walls. As I stared at it, a cold realization began to creep over me. I had not escaped the curse. I had been brought deeper into it. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. The temple seemed to shudder with each pulse of the diamond, as if the very earth was being torn apart. The symbols on the walls flared with a blinding light, and a voice, deep, ancient, and filled with malice, boomed through the temple. "You cannot escape your fate, asterisk." The voice sent a wave of terror through me, more intense than anything I had ever felt. It was the voice of the goddess, the one whose wrath had cursed the diamond centuries ago. And now that wrath was focused entirely on me. The light from the diamond intensified, and the air grew thick with a suffocating pressure. I stumbled back, desperate to find a way out, but the temple had no exits. I was trapped, caught in the grip of something far beyond my understanding. As I backed away, the walls began to close in, the temple shrinking around me, the glowing symbols warping and twisting as they converged on the diamond. The rumbling grew louder, the ground shaking violently as cracks began to form in the stone beneath my feet. And then, without warning, the diamond exploded in a burst of light so intense that it blinded me. I felt myself being thrown back, slamming into the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of me. My vision was filled with swirling colors, the afterimage of the diamond seared into my retinas. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the temple had changed again. The walls had collapsed, revealing a vast, endless void stretching out into infinity. The ground beneath me was cracked and broken, and the air was thick with a dense fog that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of its own. And then, out of the fog they came, the spirits of the diamond's victims, their forms barely human, twisted by centuries of suffering. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their faces were contorted into expressions of pure hatred. They were not the only ones. More figures emerged from the fog, shadowy and indistinct, their presence filling the void with an overwhelming sense of dread. These were the spirits of those who had died long before the diamond was even created, ancient and powerful, drawn by the goddess's curse. They closed in on me, their voices a chorus of pain and anger, their hands reaching out to drag me into the void. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ground beneath me began to crumble, and I could feel myself being pulled toward the edge, toward the darkness. In a final desperate attempt to save myself, I reached out for the diamond. But as soon as my fingers touched it, a searing pain shot through my hand, and I screamed, my body convulsing in agony. The diamond was burning me, its curse sinking deep into my flesh, into my very soul. "You are mine," the voice of the goddess whispered, cold and mocking. I knew then that there was no escape. The curse had claimed me, just as it had claimed all those before me. The spirits of the dead surrounded me, their hands closing around my throat, their whispers filling my mind with despair. The last thing I saw was the diamond, glowing brightly in the center of the void, its light growing brighter and brighter until it consumed everything. Then there was nothing but darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my study, the Hope Diamond lying on the desk in front of me. The room was silent, the air still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I could feel it, the cold presence that had seeped into my bones, the curse that had claimed me. I was alive, but I was no longer alone. The spirits of the dead were with me now, their whispers echoing in my mind, their hands clutching at my soul. I could feel them all around me, waiting, watching, biding their time. The curse had not been broken, it had simply taken a new form. I tried to leave the house, but every time I reached the door, the air grew thick, the walls closed in, and I found myself back in the study, the diamond glimmering darkly in the dim light. The house had become a prison, the curse my warden. And then one night, as I sat in the darkness, I heard it, a knock at the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. The man standing on my doorstep was young, eager, his eyes bright with curiosity as he looked at the diamond in my hand. He was just like I had been when I first inherited it, full of skepticism, of disbelief. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. I smiled, the first real smile I had felt in weeks, and handed him the diamond. As he took it, I felt the curse lift, the spirits retreating, their presence fading from my mind. The weight of the diamond of the curse was gone. But as I watched the man walk away, I knew it wouldn't be gone for long. The curse would continue, passed from one owner to the next, feeding off their fear, their pain. And one day it would return to me, because you can never truly escape the curse of the Hope Diamond. You can only pass it on. The end.